interject here and just ask a question another way. Do you
Whereas to tell a child, you go to this church, which means you'll go to heaven, but your little playmates don't go to that church, and therefore will go to hell, seems to me to be an unpleasant thing to be saying. But
yes, that is.
Maybe I'm in a minority then.
That could be an unpleasant thing, but how do you develop?
Actually, an evil thing.
Let's call it evil, Christopher.
Something that only a religious person would dream of saying.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion.
So my question again is, why, according to you, when God plays God by taking a life prematurely in the Old Testament, is it a moral outrage, but when you play God by taking a life prematurely through an abortion, it is a moral right?
Well, once again, I'm sorry if my work is so obscure, but I don't say that I have a moral right to terminate a pregnancy. I've given all the reasons that I think hedge that question ethically and morally very sternly, very stringently. And in any case, it's not like saying that every living child of the Amalekites should be destroyed. And an injunction by God to Moses to say he's been too merciful and he's spared too many children and enslaved too few women and didn't make the genocide complete. I'm sorry, I've never been accused of, and I expect not to be, if I'm lucky enough in my life, of any such thing. And the idea that there's a moral equivalence between the two, or handling the really difficult question of an unviable fetus and what should be done about it, isn't a moral equivalence at all.
So do you want to say that all unborn life is, like you say in the book, is a human being, and therefore you should not kill it? Is that what you want to say to get out of this dilemma, or what do you want to say?
No, but I think the presumption, I've long said that the presumption is that the unborn entity has a right on its side, and that every effort should be made to see if it can be preserved. And I think that's an ethical imperative. What I do say in the book is I think the Roman Catholic Church makes this argument immoral when it could be a moral one by saying that contraception is not to be allowed, by saying that contraception is the moral equivalent of abortion. In other words, to say that contraception is also murder, which is a nonsensical and disproportionate position. I quote some serious Catholics in my book. William F. Buckley, the late, is one. Clare Boothe Luce is another, by saying, if the Church says that contraception and abortion are morally the same, it degrades the opposition to abortion morally. And by making absurd arguments, as it has in the past, Aquinas believed that every single sperm contained a microembryo inside it, and thus that, if you like, I hope I don't offend anyone, hand jobs are genocide. As for blowjobs, don't start. That an ectopic pregnancy, in other words, a direct threat to the life of the mother, a fallopian tube pregnancy, is, instead of a direct threat to the life of the mother and an obvious no-starter for a human embryo, because that's going anyway, is someone who should be allowed to vote. This is nonsense. It's casuistry, it's immoral, it's superstition, and it prevents people from thinking seriously about matters that humanism can decide for itself, for heaven's sake, without any supernatural intervention.
Your question, sir.
Oh, well, since I answered your last question with a question of my own, I'll make it my question to you. I'm very keen to know how it is that you, in a sense, that you dare to say that without a belief in religion, I would have no source for ethical or moral.
It's not what I'm
beliefs.
saying.
You seem to hint at it.
No.
Did he not?
No. Oh, I'm not saying you don't know morality, Christopher. I'm saying you can't justify morality without a being beyond yourself.
So that, just if I, okay, good. So that if I say that for me it's enough to be willing to love my fellow man and perhaps hope that my fellow man and woman will give me some of the same consideration in return, and that, after all, the Samaritan, of whom we've all heard, was the only one to help after the priests and the Levites had passed by. And the Samaritan also, though he's talked of by Jesus, can't have been a Christian because he appears in a story told by Jesus, so there can't be any Christianity before that. Somehow, He knew the moral thing to do is to help his fellow person without a religious instruction.
Yes,
that's actually the whole point of the parable, though it's not the way it's usually told.
And that's what Christianity teaches. You know morality. It's written on your heart. You don't need the scripture to know right from wrong.
And this was only available to us 2,000 years ago.
No, you've known it from the beginning of time. Conscience has been on humanity from forever.
You'll have to let me press you a little bit on that. I mean, William Ewart Gladstone spent a huge amount of his life, and he was a great scholar of Latin and Greek, showing that every one of the Greek Socratic and other moral precepts, all they were just prefigurations of Christianity. These are the best the Greeks could do before Jesus arrived. But
No.
Because he couldn't face the idea that these solidarities and moralities and understandings are innate in people and don't require divine permission. I just have to ask you, if you could do it plainly, which side do you come down on? Do you think we need divine permission to act humanly to each other?
No, it has nothing to do with permission. It has to do with the ontological category known as morality. Where does morality come from? Does it come from the benzene molecule, the carbon molecule, the oxygen molecule? In your worldview, where does it come from?
Suppose that we were having this discussion before the existence of molecules was understood.
It's irrelevant.
No, it's not, because the discussion about where does the good come from was being conducted before Lucretius developed the atomic theory, before Democritus and Epicurus, I should better say, understood that the whole world was made up of atoms and molecules. Before that was known, people were arguing, why do we behave one way to our fellows, and we call it good, and another way, and we call it wicked?
Because it's written
on... I don't think you can build in a molecular distraction to that.
I don't have the molecular problem, you do. So you're a materialist. I'm trying to ask you, where does morality come from in a materialistic worldview?
Well, did I not just acquit myself of that charge and say that the argument precedes the knowledge of the atomic and molecular structure?
No, it doesn't. No.
Not that I think, by the way, that the atomic and molecular structure is irrelevant, and it could be that we might find out that there are, who knows, pheromones or other phenomena that do have an influence on our moral conditioning. This still wouldn't, to a morally normal person, relieve them of the responsibility of saying that I feel I know what's right. I feel that some things my children don't need to be told. They already know.
Let me.
He's trying to act like atheists don't have a moral basis for tough issues like abortion. But the Bible literally has God commanding genocide. Go read 1 Samuel 15:3. It says to kill men, women, children, even infants. That's not interpretation. That's the text. So how does Turek get to stand there and question anyone else's morality when his own source material includes wiping out entire populations? And then it gets worse. The church claims to be pro-life, but has historically opposed contraception. That makes no sense. The World Health Organization has shown that access to contraception reduces unintended pregnancies and lowers abortion rates. So if you actually cared about reducing abortion, you'd support that. But instead, you get rules built on doctrine, not outcomes. Hitchens is calling this out directly. Humans are capable of thinking through hard problems. We don't need ancient texts filled with contradictions telling us what's right and wrong.
Interject here and just ask a question another way.
Whereas to tell a child, you go to this church, which means you'll go to heaven, but your little playmates don't go to that church, and therefore will go to hell, seems to me to be an unpleasant thing to be saying. But
yes, that is.
Maybe I'm in a minority then.
That could be an unpleasant thing, but how do you...
Actually, an evil thing to be saying.
Let's call it evil, Christopher.
And something that only a religious person would dream of saying.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion. And to answer your next question, morality comes from humanism and is stolen by religion for its own purposes.
Humanism according to who? Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, who?
You're saying that Hitler was a humanist?
Just Hitchens.
I've lived to hear it said.
Hitchens.
In Virginia. Hitler was a Catholic.
Hitler
was a Catholic, so was Mussolini.
Give me a... How does morality exist if it's just my opinion against your opinion and there's no standard beyond?
Both of them had an official political concordat with the Protestant and Catholic churches. Both of them wanted the worship of themselves as well as of God.
So I suppose no evil comes from atheism.
Their third main ally, Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, not content just to be theocratic, was himself a god. So anyone who says that fascism and Nazism were secular is an ignoramus.
Why is it
on
wrong?
a gigantic scale.
All right. I'm asking an ontological question.
I'm not going to be called a Hitlerite because I'm a humanist. Okay?
I'm not asking a sociological question. All right. Let me ask a question another way. This is my last question. If God does not exist, why do all people have a fixed moral obligation to love and not murder? How do molecules in motion have any authority to tell you how to behave? When you do something wrong, whose standard are you breaking? Who are you displeasing? The carbon atom, the benzene molecule, who?
This question has been asked, Socrates answered it like this, when he was on trial for his life. Accused of blasphemy, by the way. He said that he had an inner daemon, was the way he put it. Not demon, a daemon, a spirit, an inner critic, a conscience would be one way of putting it. And that he knew enough to know, even when he was making the best speech of his life, that if he was making a point that was somehow dishonest or incomplete or shady, the daemon would tell him, yeah, that was clever, but you shouldn't have tried it. He knew. Okay? Any person of average moral equipment has the same knowledge. I hope you'll. If you don't, I'm very sorry for you. Adam Smith called it the internal witness, who we all have to have a conversation with all the time. It's been C.S. Lewis decided to call it conscience and to attribute it to the divine, but he didn't improve on what Adam Smith said in Theory of Moral Sentiments or what Socrates said when standing trial for his own life. It's been sometimes colloquially defined as, why do people behave well when nobody is looking? I don't believe there's anyone in this hall who doesn't know what I mean by that. Why, when it won't do you any good, will you decide, I could have kept that wallet I found on the back of the cab seat, but I'm not going to. I'm going to turn it in. I'm going to find its real possessor. There are people to whom those thoughts do not occur, who are deaf to that idea, who only think of themselves, who wouldn't worry about the internal daemon or censor or companion. And there are, of course, people who only get pleasure from being unpleasant to other people and inflicting cruelty on them. The first group we call the sociopathic, and the second group we call the psychopathic. And they occur in nature and in society. My only problem is with those who think that they're all made in the image of God. The one explanation that absolutely doesn't work at all, that gets you nowhere, that explains nothing.
Christopher, it's your turn to ask.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir.
Well, my question is this. Would anyone in the audience like to join this conversation?
We actually have questions if you're ready to move along.
Yeah, I am.
There are a couple of questions, several similar questions that boil down to a couple of questions for each of you, and then one that I'll end with that I think is an important one to address to both of you. Since you gave your turn away, Mr. Hitchens, I'll ask you first. If the questioner asks, if God does not exist, what then is the purpose of life?
Well, I can only answer for myself. What cheers me up? I suppose mainly gloating over the misfortunes of other people. I guess that.
And you say evil comes from religion,
I
huh?
guess that has to be it. I think, yeah, mainly crowing over the miseries of others. It doesn't always work, but it never completely fails. And then there's irony. There's irony, which is the gin in the Campari, the cream in the coffee. Sex can have diminishing returns, but it's amazing. No, that's pretty much it, and then it's a clear run to the grave.
You can actually see Turek getting frustrated here, and honestly, it's kind of telling. Because once Hitchens strips it down, the religious argument starts to wobble. Think about what Hitchens says about teaching kids. You're telling a child, you're going to heaven, but your friends might burn forever. That's not morality. That's fear-based control. That's psychological pressure built into the belief system. And then Turek jumps to Hitler, again. But Hitchens shuts that down fast. Hitler identified as a Christian, used religious language, and worked in a culture dominated by churches. The idea that religion had nothing to do with that environment just doesn't hold up. Then Turek asks, where does morality come from without God? Like it's some impossible mystery. But we already know the answer. Humans have empathy, social instincts, and cooperation built into us. Neuroscience shows areas like the prefrontal cortex and mirror neurons are tied to moral decision-making. Hitchens brings it back to something simple: conscience. People know when they're doing something wrong, even when no one is watching. You don't need a threat of hell for that.
Dr. Turek.
Yes, sir. Do you want me to answer that or not? That's for somebody else, okay.
If Christianity is true, then why aren't the differences that Jesus makes in the lives of Christians more powerful or evident than the impact other religions make on their adherents?
I don't know if I accept the premise of the question.
Well, the questioner adds, Gandhi was every bit as influential as any Christian.
Yeah, that's true, and that's one of the problems with Christianity. The biggest problem with Christianity is Christians. I admit it.
But the questioner is asking
Yeah.
a more central question, which is, if this is the truth,
Yes.
why then doesn't that truth, by the weight of its infinite being, cause its adherents to behave in a way that we can all notice?
Well, I think you can notice it in several Christians. I think Christians for years have been the ones that have built hospitals and cared for the poor and cared for the weak and the sick. So I think it does make a difference. My problem, which is part of the problem that the questioner is asking, is why doesn't it have this effect on everyone? And I'll throw a little Christian theology in here. The problem isn't that we don't have all the Holy Spirit. We do. We just don't allow all the Holy Spirit to do what it should do. It's our problem. We are fallen human beings. And that's why Christ had to come, because we are fallen human beings.
And has to come again because you didn't get it right the first time. I agree with you that the grammar of the question is wrong, but for a different reason. I don't see what's moral about Christian preaching. For example, apart from the horrible idea of vicarious redemption, I'll say again, in case I missed you the first time, what I mean by that. I could pay your debt, even if I didn't know you. If I was a friend, I could say, you're in debt, I'll pay it. In extreme cases, people have been known to say, I'll serve your sentence in prison. I could do that for you. What I cannot do is relieve you of your responsibility. I can't say, throw your sins on me, they'll melt away. Immoral. People are not allowed to be, you're not entitled to be relieved of their responsibilities. And the vicarious redemption by human sacrifice is a very primitive and horrible scapegoating idea that belongs to the barbaric period of human history.
So all pardons are immoral?
No, not all pardons. No, I didn't say that. I said vicarious redemption is an immoral doctrine. It's also immoral of the Nazarene to say, take no thought for the morrow, not to clothe, not to eat, not to invest, don't leave your family, leave your children, leave everything, give up the world, no investment, no thrift, no thought for the future, just follow me. That's only moral if you are a sure believer in the idea that the world is about to come to an end, which was the case with this apocalyptic.
I guess you never read the parable of the talents.
He said the prophecy is that the world is coming to an end real soon. There's no point in caring about anything else. That's not a moral preaching to me at all. There are many other ways in which I fail to see how any bad behavior can ever be described as un-Christian. And of course, it's completely laughable to say Christians build hospitals. Just many Christians have bombed hospitals as have built them, and as many Muslims have built hospitals as Christians have, and as many Babylonians have built great buildings as Christians have. If that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do.
One of the questioners repeats a point from Dr. Turek's opening statement that apparently he or she feels you did not address, Mr. Hitchens, about the irreducible complexity of DNA. And is it possible for such structures to have formed by chance?
Well, I have two responses to that. One is, what would she have said before she knew about DNA?
What does that have to do with anything?
Well,
They existed prior to anyone knowing about them.
Yes. That's right.
Gravity existed before we knew about it,
That's
Christopher.
correct.
You need an explanation
That's
for
correct,
that.
and Christianity thought it could explain everything, and then it found
No,
there
not
were more
everything.
things. Wait, this is very simple, same as your point about molecules, that I said that these arguments predate Epicurus, Lucretius, and the atomic theory. Christianity used to say it can explain everything. All you need to know is there's an all-powerful, all-loving, all-intervening, all-knowing, omniscient God. Okay, well then wait, wouldn't DNA explain more? Well that only shows that God's even cleverer than we thought. So it's an infinitely expanding tautology. There are some Christians who accept, in fact it was actually a Catholic physicist at the University of Louvain in Belgium who first came up with the idea of what we now call the Big Bang. And most popes, not all, but most popes have accepted it. Some have thought of it as a challenge to Christianity. The Pope Leo, who he went to, I can't remember the scientist's name for a second, maybe someone here can help me. He went to the Pope and said, look, looks like this is how things started. And the Pope said, if you like, I'll make it a dogma that every Catholic has to believe it. He said, that would be slightly missing the point, Your Holiness.
Christopher, what does
the
this
point
have
is
to do with the origin of DNA?
Well, because it is true to say that religion, as Stephen Jay Gould said, that religion and science belong to non-overlapping magisteria. I think these magisteria are in many ways incompatible and in many ways irreconcilable, but it is no more true to say that the existence of the complexity of DNA shows that God was more ingenious than we thought, than it is to say that it necessarily shows by its self-revealing ingenuity that we don't need the hypothesis of God. Both of these positions would be, in my opinion, somewhat reductionist, though I would have to say that I think the second one is more persuasive and more elegant.
Now, Gould is wrong.
Will that do?
Christians or religious people, religion is trying to find out how the universe began, and so is science. They're not.
No, religion says it does know, excuse me.
No, it's trying
Religion is
to
not a
find
process of scientific inquiry. Religion is an affirmation of faith. It
I
says
am
it
a
already
religious
knows.
person, Christopher,
It
and
says
I
it
am
already
using
knows.
evidence to try and point out that the universe exploded into being out of nothing.
And you have scientific evidence for the view that an intervention will occur to prevent the implosion and
No,
entropy
forget
of
that. Let's start at the beginning.
I can't forget it.
Let's start at the beginning. That's for debate
It's the
two.
only thing you've said all evening that I'm going to remember.
Gentlemen.
That's for debate two.
No. I mean, don't say, look, do yourself and your faith the honor of saying it's faith. Don't say it's science-based.
The argument would be...
You won't get away with it.
Look, the argument would be, Christopher, is that if the universe exploded into being out of nothing, then miracles are possible because the greatest miracle of all has already occurred. The question is, have miracles occurred in the first century? That requires another debate whereby we'd have to look at the historical evidence and see. And if it is true that that Jesus really did come and say and do the things that the New Testament writer said he did, then whatever he teaches is true, because if he rose from the dead, he was God. If he taught that there will be an intervention, then there will be. That's the argument. I don't have time to support it.
Very good. Now, a sentence or two from David Hume on miracles would clear all this up.
You'll need to.
Oh dear.
It's fallen off. Sorry.
That's one up. Right. A sentence or two from David Hume would correct what you said. A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural order.
No, an intervention.
You can't say of the Big Bang, which is the foundation of the natural order, that it's a suspension of what it starts. You may not do that. However, if you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake? And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all. But yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I can say, I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
This part really exposes the weakness in Turek's whole case. He's basically saying, if Christianity is true, it should transform people. But then he admits, it doesn't consistently do that. And his excuse? Humans are fallen. So now the standard drops. Christianity is supposed to be the ultimate truth, backed by an all-powerful God, but it produces the same flawed behavior as every other belief system. Gandhi, who wasn't Christian, had just as much moral influence. That alone should raise serious questions. And then Hitchens goes straight at the core doctrine: substitution. The idea that someone else can take your punishment. You don't get to commit wrong, then transfer the consequences onto someone innocent. That concept shows up in ancient tribal systems, not modern ethics. Then we get to science, and this is where it really collapses. Turek tries to use DNA complexity as evidence for God, but that's just a gap argument. We didn't understand lightning, so people said, God did it. Then science explained it. Same pattern here. Complexity doesn't prove a designer. It just means we're still learning. And when pushed, it all comes back to faith. Not evidence, not testable proof, just belief. Hitchens makes it clear. If you can explain everything with God, then you're not explaining anything at all. So what do you think? Does belief in God actually explain anything? Or does it just fill in the gaps where we don't have answers yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more breakdowns like this. And don't forget, we already covered part 1 of this debate, so go check that out next.